My name is Diane Ruth Ellison. I am 34 years old. And the night, I stood up at my dining room table and slid a folder across the white tablecloth toward my mother-in-law. The room went so quiet I could hear the candles burning. She had arrived that evening carrying a ceramic dish of her famous sweet potato casserole and a list of demands she had been rehearsing for 3 months. She sat at my table, in my dining room, in the house my parents had bought and paid for and placed in my name before I ever said I do. She sat there with the comfortable confidence of a woman who has decided that what she wants is the same thing as what she deserves. My husband Derek sat at the head of the table. His sister Pamela sat to his left. My parents sat across from them, my father with his hands folded on the table, my mother with her coffee cup held in both hands the way she holds things when she is trying to stay calm. Derek's mother, Roberta Ann Whitfield, had just finished explaining, pleasantly, over the sweet potato casserole, that she would be needing a key to the house. Not for emergencies, not as a backup, as a regular arrangement, because, as she put it, this is family now, and family doesn't knock. She looked at me when she said it, the look of a woman who has already decided how this conversation ends. I looked back at her, opened the folder, and what happened in the next 37 minutes changed every assumption in that room about whose house it was, whose money had built it, and whose name the law recognized as the only one that mattered. Welcome back to Sweet Payback Stories. If you've ever had someone mistake your kindness for permission, this story is for you. Subscribe and stay until the end, because some lessons are best delivered with paperwork. My father's name is Harold Ellison. He is 63 years old, and for 31 years he drove a school bus for Caldwell County. Route 7, which covered the rural stretch of roads between the county seat and the outlying communities where the houses sat far apart and the kids waited at the end of long gravel driveways in the cold and the dark. He drove that route for 31 years without missing a single day of work that wasn't a scheduled vacation or a documented illness. He took pride in that, the way some men take pride in trophies, quietly, without needing anyone to confirm it. He knew what his record was. He didn't need a plaque. My mother Ruth worked the bakery counter at the Food Lion in Lenore for 24 years. She was there at 5 in the morning pulling trays from the oven before the store opened. She smelled like cinnamon and industrial cleaning solution most evenings when she came home, and she never once complained about it, because complaining, she always said, was the luxury of people who had better options, and she was busy being grateful for the option she had. They were not wealthy. I want to say that plainly, because the story I'm about to tell you involves a house worth more than anything my parents had ever individually owned, and I don't want you to hear that and think it came easy. It did not come easy. It came out of 30 years of packed lunches, of a family vacation every other year instead of every year, of a car kept until it wouldn't start, of a savings account that Harold put $30 into every single week from the time I was born without touching it once. I am an only child. That matters to this story, because it means that everything my parents saved went toward one person. Not divided, not split, not negotiated between siblings. One child, one intention, one house. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. I work with children who have developmental delays, sensory processing challenges, kids who need help learning to navigate the world that was built for brains different from theirs. I love my work in the specific way that people love work that feels necessary rather than simply chosen. I have been doing it for 9 years, first at a clinic, now with my own small private practice that I started 3 years ago from the spare bedroom of the house I am about to tell you about. The house is a 3-bedroom Craftsman on Birchwood Lane in Morganton, North Carolina, built in 1987, renovated in 2014. Front porch with an original wooden swing. A kitchen with a gas stove my mother tested every burner on before my parents signed anything. A side yard with a garden bed that my father dug himself the week after closing, in October, because he said late fall was the right time to turn the soil. My parents purchased it outright in the October before my wedding. Cash, no mortgage, no lender, just Harold Ellison's 30 years of bus driving and Ruth Ellison's 24 years of bakery counter work, combined and directed toward one purpose. The deed was recorded with the Burke County Register of Deeds on October 14th. Grantee, Diane Ruth Ellison. My maiden name, not Diane Whitfield, not Diane Ellison Whitfield, not Derek and Diane. Just me. My father had spoken with an attorney beforehand. The attorney was a man named Gerald Overton, who had a small practice in Lenore, and who had helped my father with a contract matter years earlier. Gerald told my father to also prepare a gift letter a notarized document establishing that the property was being transferred as a gift solely to Diane Ruth Ellison as her separate property, not subject to equitable distribution in any future legal proceeding. My father had Gerald draft it. He signed it. My mother signed it. Gerald notarized it. The original went into a fireproof document box my father kept on the top shelf of his bedroom closet, and he handed me a certified copy at the closing table and said 6 words. Keep this somewhere nothing can happen to it. I put it in my own fireproof box when I got home. The one I kept in the closet of the room I used as my home office. The one with the keyed lock that I had the only key to. I am telling you all of this now because none of it is complicated. None of it is secret. It is simply the record of what actually happened, and records, I would learn, are the only things that survive the version of events that other people construct when they want something that isn't theirs. I met Derek Whitfield the following spring at a continuing education conference in Asheville. He was there for a sales workshop his company had sent him to. We ended up at the same table at the hotel restaurant the second evening, and he was charming in the way that some men are charming, attentive, funny, with a laugh that made the room feel smaller and warmer. We exchanged numbers before the conference ended. We dated for 14 months. I introduced him to my parents on month 3. My father shook his hand and asked him 2 direct questions: what he did for work and whether he had savings. My mother made roast chicken and biscuits and watched how he treated me at the table. His smooth, my father said to me the next morning, which from Harold Ellison was neither a compliment nor an accusation, just an observation, the kind that contains within it a suggestion to pay attention. I paid attention. What I saw during 14 months of dating was a man who was warm to my face and occasionally impatient when he thought I wasn't watching. A man who called his mother every day, twice on Sundays, and who had a specific tone of voice he used when he talked about her that I could not then name, but which I would eventually understand was the tone of a man who had never learned where his obligations ended and his own life began. We married in April. The ceremony was at the Botanical Garden in Lenore. 38 guests, simple and real. Derek moved into the house on Birchwood Lane that May. I showed him the deed when we talked about shared finances. I was clear about its structure. His name was not on it. That was not a slight against him. It was a fact that had been established before we met, and I told him so plainly, and he nodded and said he understood. He said he understood. I need you to remember that he said that. Roberta Ann Whitfield was 61 years old, and she occupied more space than her physical presence required. Not because she was loud, she was rarely loud, because she had the particular talent of certain women of her generation, of making every room she entered feel like it was functioning on her behalf. The furniture arranged itself around her preferences. The conversation oriented toward her stories. The meal was evaluated against her standards, whether you asked for the evaluation or not. She lived 40 minutes from Morganton in a 2-bedroom house she owned, which I mention because the financial situation at play here was not one of need. Roberta was not destitute. She was not elderly in the way that requires daily assistance. She was 61 with a paid-off house, a pension from the 26 years she had spent as an administrative coordinator for the county school district, and a daughter named Pamela, who lived 20 minutes from her and visited twice a week. What Roberta had was not a need for shelter. What Roberta had was an idea about what marriage meant, and the idea was this: that when her son married, she married into the household too. Not as a resident, at least not at first. As a presence with standing, an authority without portfolio. A woman whose approval of the arrangement was an ongoing requirement rather than a one-time courtesy. The first visit was the weekend after we returned from our honeymoon. She arrived Friday evening with a covered dish and a suitcase, which I had not been told about. Derek mentioned it when she pulled into the driveway. "Mom's going to stay the weekend," he said. "That okay?" It was not phrased as a question, which I would learn was how Derek handled most things that were not actually questions. I said that would be fine, and I meant it, because I am a generous person by nature, and because a single weekend was a single weekend. She stayed 4 nights. The second visit was the following month. 5 nights. She rearranged the spice cabinet while I was at work, which she described as organizing, and replaced my dish soap with a brand she preferred, which she described as better. I mentioned it to Derek. He said his mother was trying to help. I said helping and rearranging were different things. and that I would appreciate being consulted before anything in my kitchen was changed. He stared at me the way he stared at things he found inconvenient. She's my mother, Diane. She's not a house guest. She's family. She's welcome here as family, I said. She still doesn't get to redecorate without asking. He went quiet. Derek's quiet was not peaceful. It was preparatory. The visits continued. Monthly, then twice monthly, then every other week, the length extending by increments. I began to notice that Roberta never arrived without a comment about something that needed changing, delivered in the pleasant tone of a woman offering a gift. This living room would feel so much bigger with lighter curtains. Your kitchen really could use an island, couldn't it, Derek? That garden bed would do better with stone borders. She didn't do anything about these observations. She simply made them, the way a person makes notes toward a renovation they are planning, and moved on. I said once to Derek that his mother seemed to have a lot of opinions about my house. Our house, he said. My house, I said. Derek, we have talked about this. The deed is in my name. That is not a power play. That is how the paperwork is filed. He stood in the kitchen with his jaw set and said nothing, which was how Derek participated in most conversations he could not win. In March, 8 months after our wedding, Pamela called me. Pamela was 30, unmarried, working part-time at a dentist's office in Lenore. She was not unkind in the way Roberta was not unkind. They both operated at a level of pleasantness that made their maneuvering difficult to name in the moment. Pamela said she was calling because she wanted to give me a heads up, which is always the sentence that precedes a piece of information someone has decided you should know, but does not want to be credited with telling you. Mom has been talking about spending more time at your place, Pamela said. She thinks it would be good for the family. More connected, she said. Derek agrees. How much more time? I asked. She's thinking a room, Pamela said. Permanently. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the school, where I had just finished a session with a 7-year-old who was learning to hold a pencil, and I let that sentence settle. A room, permanently, in a house that had been purchased for me by my parents with money they had spent 30 years saving, deeded in my maiden name, covered by a notarized gift letter establishing it as my sole and separate property. A room, permanently. I said I would think about it. I drove home and went directly to my home office and unlocked the document box and took out the certified copy of the deed and the gift letter and read both of them, slowly, the way I read clinical documentation when I need to be certain of exactly what something says. Then I called my father. My father answered on the second ring, which was how he always answered my calls. He had told me once that when your child calls, you pick up. He meant it as a general principle. He practiced it without exception. I told him what Pamela had said. I did not editorialize. I gave him the information the same way I give parents clinical information, plainly, in sequence, without softening it into something easier to absorb. Harold was quiet for a moment. The deed is clean, he said. Gerald filed it right. They can't claim anything on that house without your signature. I know, I said, but you're calling me, which means there's more. There was more. I told him about the visits, the spice cabinet, the curtain comments, Pamela's call, the Fraser room, permanently. I told him about Derek's habit of saying our house in a tone that suggested repetition would eventually make it true. Harold did not say anything for a long time. I could hear the television in the background, low, the evening news. How's Derek with money? He asked. Fine, I said. We have a joint account for household expenses. My practice income goes into my personal account. His salary goes into his personal account. We each transfer an agreed amount into the joint account every month. And you keep records. I keep records, I said. Keep better ones, Harold said. Starting now. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the conversation, my father had given me the name of a family law attorney in Morganton, a woman named Carol Jeffries, whom Gerald Overton had referred him to when he first consulted about the deed structure, and whom he had stayed in touch with over the years on the theory that good attorneys are worth knowing before you need them. Call Carol, Harold said. Don't wait until there's a crisis. Call her now while you still have time to be organized about it. I called Carol Jeffries the next morning. Her office was in a brick building on Green Street, 2nd floor, a view of the courthouse parking lot. She was 52, direct in the manner of someone who has spent 3 decades listening to people describe problems that could have been prevented with earlier legal consultation, and who has made her peace with the irony. I brought the deed and the gift letter. I also brought 3 months of joint account statements, because Harold had told me to start keeping better records, and I had started the moment I hung up the phone. Carol read both documents, looked at the account statements, and said what my father had said, only in legal language. The property is your separate property. The deed predates the marriage, it's in your maiden name, and the gift letter is properly notarized and establishes clear donative intent. As long as you haven't commingled joint funds into the mortgage, which there isn't one, or made significant improvements using marital assets, this house is not subject to equitable distribution. What if Derek adds his name to the deed? He can't without your signature. You'd have to willingly execute a new deed naming him as a co-owner. What if he claims he's made contributions to the household that create an equitable interest? Carol tilted her head slightly. Where is this coming from? I told her about Roberta's visits. The room, the permanent arrangement Derek seemed to be building toward. The fact that Derek had told his mother and his sister about the possibility before telling me. Carol listened without expression, the way experienced attorneys listen, absorbing without reacting, filing things in the places where they will be useful later. I want you to do something for me, she said. I want you to audit your joint account going back 12 months. Look for any charges you don't recognize, any vendors, any recurring payments, anything that doesn't match the household expenses you'd expect. You think there's something there? I think, Carol said, choosing her words carefully, that when a man begins planning a significant change to a household arrangement without consulting the person who owns the house, he's usually planning more than one thing at a time. I drove home from Carol's office and sat at the desk in my home office and opened 12 months of joint account statements on my laptop. It took me 2 hours to find it. Starting in January, 4 months ago, there were recurring charges from a vendor called Whitfield Property Services. The amounts varied: $1,100 in January, $1,400 in February, $900 in March, $1,600 in April, each one categorized as maintenance and repairs. I walked through the house. Nothing had been repaired since November, when my father had fixed the downspout on the back gutter, free of charge, on a Saturday morning. The floors were the same, the roof was the same, the HVAC was the same. I searched Whitfield Property Services in the North Carolina Secretary of State's Business Registry, LLC, registered 6 months ago. Registered agent, Derek Allen Whitfield. I sat back in my chair. Then I picked up my phone and called Carol Jeffries and told her what I had found. She said, "Don't confront him yet. Forward me everything. I'm going to refer you to a forensic accountant." The forensic accountant's name was Barbara Holt. She worked from a home office in Hickory and had a reputation Carol described as thorough and unambiguous, which I understood to mean that Barbara Holt found things and was not delicate about saying what they were. I met Barbara the following week. I brought printed statements, the LLC filing, and a spreadsheet I had built myself cross-referencing every Whitfield Property Services charge, with the corresponding date, and the corresponding absence of any actual work performed on the property. Barbara looked at my spreadsheet and said, "You did half my job already." "I work with children who have processing disorders," I said. "Documentation is how I think." She nodded. "Give me 10 days. I gave her 10 days. And while I waited, something else happened that I had not anticipated. Something that made Carol's advice about staying quiet feel more important than ever. Roberta called me directly. It was a Wednesday evening. Derek was at a work dinner. I was in my home office finishing a therapy report when my phone rang, with Roberta's name on the screen. I answered. Her voice was warm, the particular warmth she used when she was about to say something she had decided was reasonable. "Diane, honey, I think it's time we talked about the arrangement." I set my pen down. "What arrangement?" "Me and the house. Derek and I have been discussing it. I think it would work beautifully for everyone if I had a proper key, so I could come and go as needed. Be more of a help to you both. I don't want to be a burden, I just want to be present." "I want to be present," said with the warmth of a woman offering a gift, the same way she described rearranging the spice cabinet. "Roberta," I said, keeping my voice level, "this house belongs to me. My parents bought it for me before Derek and I were married. I would need to think carefully about any arrangement involving regular access." A pause. The warmth dropped by 1 degree. "Diane, I understand the the technicalities, but this is Derek's home too. He lives here. He's my son. I'm not asking you to hand me the keys to a stranger's house. The deed is in my name, I said. That's not a technicality. That's the legal record. Another pause. Longer. I think we should all sit down together, she said. The whole family. We can talk this through like adults. I'm happy to have a family dinner, I said. Let's do that. She said she would coordinate with Derek. I said that sounded fine. We hung up. I sat at my desk for 3 minutes, and then I called my father. Dad, I said, I need you and Mom at a family dinner. Whenever Roberta sets it up, we'll be there. Bring the originals, I said. The deed and the gift letter. Silence. Harold's voice, when it came back, was steady and quiet. I'll bring the fireproof box. The dinner was set for a Saturday. 2 weeks later, Roberta volunteered to bring her sweet potato casserole, which told me she expected the evening to be celebratory. A formality, before an outcome she considered settled. Derek confirmed the guest list: his mother, his sister Pamela, my parents, him, and me. In those 2 weeks, Barbara Holt sent me her report. 14 pages, tabbed with exhibits, the kind of document that doesn't leave room for interpretation. The summary was this: Derek had created Whitfield Property Services, LLC 6 months ago. Between January and April, he had submitted 8 invoices to our joint checking account for maintenance work on the Birchwood Lane property, work that he documented on invoices that matched nothing performed at the address. Total drawn from our joint account through the fabricated invoices, $6,800. Where did the money go? Barbara had traced it to a checking account at Pinnacle Financial Partners. Account holder, Roberta and Whitfield, $6,800. From our joint account, through a shell company, into his mother's checking account. I read Barbara's report the way I read complex clinical assessments. Once for the overview, once for the details, once for the implications. Then I called Carol Jeffries. Carol was quiet for a moment after I finished reading her the summary. He's been funding the arrangement in advance, she said. He wanted resources in his mother's account before the conversation about her moving in, so she'd have money to contribute to the household, her own money, technically, that he'd already moved from yours. I sat with that. File the divorce petition Monday, Carol said. I can have it drafted by Friday. The dinner is Saturday, I said. Another pause. Then Saturday, Carol said. You go to that dinner with the deed, the gift letter, and Barbara's report. And you let the truth do what it does. That week I built the folder. The deed, certified copy, tabbed at the grantee line. The gift letter, tabbed at the key language, sole and separate property. Barbara's report, 14 pages, exhibits behind a cover sheet that listed every invoice date, amount, and corresponding bank deposit into Roberta's account. A 1-page summary I wrote myself in plain English, because I work with children who are learning to understand the world, and I know that clarity is always more powerful than complexity. I also prepared one more document, a letter to Derek, written in my own handwriting, 3 paragraphs. I had not decided yet whether I would read it at the table or simply place it in front of him. I put it behind everything else in the folder, the last thing, the personal thing, the true thing that lived underneath the legal record. Friday night, I cooked chicken and roasted vegetables, a green salad, good bread, the kind of meal that says nothing is wrong, everything is fine, come to the table. I set the table with the good dishes, fresh flowers on the sideboard, candles at the center. The folder went on the hook behind my chair, inside my bag, where it had been sitting for a week. I went to bed at 10 and slept better than I had in months, which surprised me until I understood why. I was not dreading the next day. I was ready for it. Roberta arrived at 6 with the sweet potato casserole in a covered dish and the particular energy of a woman who has rehearsed her victory. She set the dish on the counter and walked through the first floor of the house with the proprietary ease of someone who has already, in her own mind, moved in. It really is a lovely home, she said to my mother, which was the closest Roberta had ever come to acknowledging that my mother had anything to do with it. My mother said thank you in the voice she uses when she is being polite to someone she has already assessed. Pamela arrived 10 minutes later. She hugged me at the door and said the flowers were beautiful, and I could tell from the way she looked at the table that she was not entirely at ease with the evening, which told me she knew more about what was planned than she had let on in our phone conversation 3 months earlier. My father shook Derek's hand, sat down, and set the brown envelope on the table beside his plate without a word. He had brought the originals, as I asked. We ate. The casserole was good. The chicken was good. The conversation stayed at the surface the way conversation does when 7 people are circling something nobody has said yet. After the plates were cleared and I had refilled the water glasses, Derek tapped his fork against his glass. The room oriented toward him the way rooms orient toward the person who controls the next sentence. He stood up. He smiled at his mother. He said, "I want to share some good news with everyone. Mom's lease at her current place is coming up for renewal, and after a lot of thought and conversation, Diane and I have agreed that the right thing is for Mom to move into the 3rd bedroom here permanently. We'd love to have her closer, and this house is more than big enough." He looked at me. "Right, babe." I looked back at him. I had heard that sentence, or a version of it, in my imagination, every night for 2 weeks, and I had practiced my response to it the way I practice new therapy techniques, in private, repeatedly, until it became natural. I stood up. I reached behind my chair and took the folder from my bag. I set it on the table. I opened it. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something changes hands that changes everything. "I'm glad everyone is here," I said. My voice was the same voice I use when I sit across from anxious parents and explain what is true about their child. Clear, steady, no performance, because I have something to share with this family too. Derek's smile faltered. "Diane, this is the deed to this house." I held it up. "Recorded with the Burke County Register of Deeds on October 14th. 4 years ago." The grantee line reads Diane Ruth Ellison. My maiden name. Not Diane Whitfield, not Derek and Diane, not any variation that includes anyone else at this table. I set the deed down. "This is the notarized gift letter prepared by my parents' attorney and executed before my wedding." I held it up. "I'll read the relevant language. This property is gifted solely to Diane Ruth Ellison as her sole and separate property, not subject to equitable distribution in any future legal proceeding." I looked at my father. "Dad, would you like to confirm?" Harold opened the brown envelope and laid the originals flat on the table. "That's our signatures," he said. "Ruth's and mine. We paid for that house in cash. It was bought for Diane, not for anyone else at this table." Roberta's hands, folded on the tablecloth, went still. "Derek," she said quietly. "Tell her." Derek said nothing. I turned the page. "But the house isn't the most important thing I need to share tonight." I pulled out Barbara's report. Over the past 4 months, charges have been made to our joint checking account from a vendor called Whitfield Property Services. 8 invoices, maintenance and repair work on this property. I paused. "No maintenance or repair work has been performed on this property since November, when my father fixed the back gutter himself on a Saturday morning, free of charge." I looked at my father. He nodded once. "Whitfield Property Services is a limited liability company registered with the North Carolina Secretary of State 6 months ago. The registered agent is Derek Allen Whitfield." I turned to the first exhibit. The total bill to our joint account through 8 fabricated invoices is $6,800. A forensic accountant traced every dollar from our joint account through the LLC to a checking account at Pinnacle Financial Partners. I looked at Roberta. "In your name." The color left Roberta's face in the way color leaves a room when the light changes. All at once, nothing gradual. Pamela said, "Derek, what is she talking about?" Derek said nothing. He was staring at the folder the way people stare at things they cannot make disappear by looking at them. $6,800, I said. "From the joint account we opened to share household expenses through a company Derek created. Into your checking account, Roberta. 8 deposits, corresponding to 8 invoices for work that was never performed on a house that is not Derek's to invoice against." Roberta turned to Derek. Her voice had dropped to the low register she probably used at home when the pleasantness had served its purpose. Derek looked at his mother. Something moved through his face. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a man who had calculated the risk and was now watching the calculation fail in real time. "I was going to tell you about it eventually," he said to me. Not to the room, to me, as though the thing to apologize for was the timing rather than the act. "Tell me about what?" I said. "About the shell company, about the fabricated invoices, about the fact that you moved money from our joint account to your mother's checking account without telling me." "Which part was the eventually?" Pamela pushed her chair back from the table. "Derek, I didn't know about this. Pamela, I didn't know about this, she said again, looking at no one, looking at the tablecloth. I called Diane to give her a heads up about Mom moving in. You said it was already decided. You didn't tell me about any money. It's not a big deal, Derek said. It was to help Mom get set up for the transition. The transition to a house that isn't yours, I said. He looked at me. Derek, you stood up at this table tonight and told our families that your mother is moving into my house. You said we had agreed on it. We did not agree on anything. You and your mother decided. You built a financial structure to support the decision using our joint money before you bothered to ask the person whose name is on the deed. I kept my voice level. I would like you to hear what that is. That is not a miscommunication. That is a plan executed without my knowledge or consent. Roberta found her voice. It was not the warm one. I am 61 years old and I have watched my son give everything he has to this marriage. Everything. And you're going to sit here with your folder and your forensic accountant and humiliate him in front of his family over a house your parents gave you like it makes you better than us. I looked at her. I had prepared for this too. Roberta, I want to say something to you directly. She stopped. I know what you want. I said it without anger. You want to be close to your son. You want to feel secure. You want a home that feels like yours. I held her eyes. Those are real things. I'm not dismissing them, but wanting something real does not make it yours to take. My mother made a small sound across the table. My parents stood at a register and drove a school bus for 30 years. So I could have a foundation. 30 years. This house is that foundation, and I will not apologize for protecting it. I closed the folder. I looked at Derek. I've spoken with a family law attorney. On Monday, I'm filing for legal separation. A motion to preserve the Birchwood Lane property as separate property will be filed simultaneously, along with Barbara Holt's forensic accounting report as Exhibit A, documenting the dissipation of marital assets through Whitfield Property Services LLC. Derek stood up, not with anger, with the specific alarm of someone who has spent months building something and is watching it come apart faster than he can follow. Over this, you're filing over this, over $6,800 stolen from our joint account, I said. Over a fake company, over a permanent living arrangement announced without my consent in my own home. Yes, Derek, over this, Pamela said quietly. Derek, sit down. He didn't sit down. He grabbed the back of his chair and looked at his mother and then at me and said the thing that people say when the argument is over and they know it. I did this for us, for our family. We don't have the same definition of family, I said. Roberta stood. She picked up her casserole dish with both hands. She looked around the table, at Pamela, who was studying her plate, at my mother, who was watching her steadily, at Harold, who had not moved. And she looked at me. You'll regret this, she said. I met her eyes. No, I said, I won't. She left. The sweet potato casserole went with her. Derek followed his mother to the door, then stopped, then stood in the hallway for a long moment doing the math, and then he went upstairs. Pamela stayed. She sat at the table while my father carefully stacked the originals back into the brown envelope and my mother got up and started clearing the plates, quietly, the way she did everything, without being asked and without making it into a moment. Pamela looked at me across the table. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know about the money. I want you to know that. I know, I said. Is there anything I can do? I thought about it. Just be honest, I said. If you're asked about any of this, just be honest. She nodded. She picked up her purse and she left, and for the first time since October, my house was only full of people who were supposed to be in it. Monday morning at 8:30. I was at the Burke County Courthouse with Carol Jeffries. We filed the legal separation petition and the motion to preserve separate property simultaneously. Barbara's report went in as Exhibit A. The deed and gift letter went in as Exhibits B and C. Carol had told me the property claim was airtight. She was right. Derek's attorney, a solo practitioner in Hickory, who handled mostly contract work and had limited family law experience, reviewed the documentation and called Carol that same week. The conversation, as Carol described it, was short. The house had never been in genuine dispute. The deed was clean. The gift letter was properly executed. Derek had never been added to the title. He had never contributed to property taxes or insurance, both of which I had paid from my personal account for 4 years. There was nothing to contest, and contesting it would only add legal fees to a case his client had already lost on the first page of Exhibit B. Derek moved into his mother's house in Lenore at the end of the month. He packed his belongings into a rented truck on a Sunday afternoon. I was at my parents' house that day. My mother had made pot roast, and my father spent the afternoon in the garden with me, showing me which perennials to cut back before winter. When I came home that evening, the house was exactly as it had always been and also completely different. The way a space feels when it stops holding its breath. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. North Carolina requires a 1-year separation period, and we counted every day of it. The equitable distribution hearing addressed the joint account. Derek was ordered to reimburse $4,300 from his share of the remaining joint assets, the portion attributable to the fraudulent invoices that could be directly traced to money I had contributed. The remaining $2,500, already transferred to Roberta's account and partially withdrawn, was the subject of a negotiated settlement. Roberta returned $1,800. Carol accepted that on my behalf and closed the matter. Derek did not fight the property claim. His attorney's advice had been clear and he had followed it, which was perhaps the most sensible thing Derek did during our entire marriage. I received my final divorce decree on a Tuesday in October, almost exactly 4 years to the day after my parents closed on the house on Birchwood Lane. I stood in Carol's office and held the decree for a moment. "The house is yours," Carol said. "It was always yours." "I know," I said, "but now there's nothing left to argue about." She smiled. "That's the goal." I drove home. I stopped at the hardware store on the way and bought new doorknobs for the front and back doors. Not because the locks had been compromised, but because I wanted to. Some things you change not because they are broken, but because the changing is the point. My father came the following Saturday. He brought his toolbox, the same one he had carried for 30 years, the same one he had opened in every emergency I had ever called him about, and he helped me install the new hardware. We worked quietly, the way we always worked, without needing to fill the silence with anything. When we finished, he tested the front door from the outside. Locked it, unlocked it, pushed it open. "Good," he said. We sat on the porch swing afterward with coffee. The October air was cool and the marigolds he had planted along the front walk had gone to seed for the season, dry and brown and already done. He looked at them. "Spring," he said. "We'll put in fresh ones." "I know a garden center," I said. He nodded. Drank his coffee. Looked at the yard for a long time. "You know what I think about sometimes," he said. "What?" "All the times I crawled under a house with a wrench and a flashlight." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Cold mornings, bad pipes, people who hadn't maintained things the way they should. You fix it, you leave, and the house belongs to them again. They don't know your name by the end of the week." He looked at the front door, the new hardware catching the light. "But this one." He stopped. "This one I know who lives here." I put my hand on his arm. We sat there until the coffee went cold, and neither of us moved to go inside right away, because some porches, on some October mornings, are exactly right the way they are. Here is what I know now that I did not know 4 years ago. A deed is not just a legal document. It is the record of what someone decided you deserved. My parents decided I deserved a foundation before I was old enough to build one myself, and they built it with 30 years of early mornings, and bus routes, and bakery counter shifts, and a savings account that never got touched for anything that wasn't me. That is not a thing you hand over at a dinner table to a woman with a casserole dish and a set of expectations she has dressed up as family. I did not fight at that dinner table. I did not shout. I did not accuse or shame or perform any of the things that might have felt satisfying in the moment and cost me everything in the proceedings that followed. I stated facts. I presented documents. I let the record speak in the way records speak, clearly, without emotion, in language that courts recognize, and that entitled assumptions cannot override. The folder on the hook behind my chair. The deed and the gift letter, and 14 pages of forensic accounting. The work of a forensic accountant named Barbara Holt and an attorney named Carol Jeffries and an accountant father named Harold Ellison who, 30 years before any of this, had the foresight to put his daughter's name on a house in her maiden name, because he understood that love without legal clarity is just hope, and hope is not a foundation. Some things you build with your hands. Some things you build with 30 years of discipline, and a fireproof document box on the top shelf of a bedroom closet. Both kinds of building matter. The second kind outlasts everything. That's my story. If you've ever had to remind someone that your kindness wasn't permission, tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. Subscribe to Sweet Payback Stories, where the truth is always in writing.